J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class, and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr. Okay.
Thank you, and good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Mrs. Margaret Ann Hall Trotman of Pineview, Georgia. The family of Miss Talika Diane Ford of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mother May Lois Turner Green of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mr. Tony Lorenzo Patrick of Atlanta, Georgia. The family of Mr. Boise Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Grace Mathis Johnson of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Ella May Mumphrey of Macon, Georgia. The family of Mr. Kelsey LaJohn Colson of Houston, Florida, and Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mrs. Margaret Ann Hall Trotman, age 65, of 1257 Blue Lane Road, Pineview, Georgia, died Sunday, July 24th at the Taylor Regional Hospital in Hawkinsville, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Margaret Ann Hall Trotman, age 65, was held Friday, August 5th, graveside at the Pine City Baptist Church Cemetery in Rochelle, Georgia. Elder James Patterson, pastor of the Cornerstone Ministry Church of God by Faith, officiated. Her beloved son, the Reverend Kelsey Marshall, delivered the eulogy. Survivors include her living and devoted children, Miss Letitia Angela Trotman Benjamin, and her husband, Mr. Rick Benjamin of Rochelle, Georgia, and Mr. Richard Jerome Trotman Jr. and his wife, Mrs. LaWanda Trotman, her beloved stepchildren, Ms. Renee Marshall of Rochelle, Georgia, the Reverend Kelsey Marshall and his wife, Mrs. Barbara Marshall of Fitzgerald, Georgia, Mr. Ricky Trotman and his wife, Mrs. Jonah Trotman of Ashburn, Georgia, Mr. Christopher Marshall and his wife, Mrs. Samika Marshall of Rochelle, Georgia, Mr. Lenny Marshall and Mrs. Holly Marshall Franklin, and her husband, Mr. Curtis Franklin of Atlanta, Georgia, her beloved grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her beloved mother, Mrs. Betty Jo Jones Hall of Rochelle, Georgia, her beloved sisters, Mrs. Kathy Hall of Atlanta, Georgia, Miss Joanne Smith and Miss Irene Smith, both of Buffalo, New York, her beloved brothers, Mr. Albert Lee Hall of Jacksonville, Florida, Mr. Joe Nathan Smith and Mr. Jackie Lee Smith, both of Buffalo, New York, her beloved companion, Mr. Jesse Jackson of Pineview, Georgia, her beloved goddaughter, Miss Carolyn Gardner of Atlanta, Georgia, a host of beloved nieces, nephews, and cousins, to include her special cousins, Miss Maylee Trotman and Miss Geneva Howard, both of Rochelle, Georgia, a host of beloved friends, to include her special friends, Miss Yvonne Jackson, Miss Sheila Coley, Miss Alice Coley, all of Rochelle, Georgia, Miss Teresa Allen, Miss Robin Hooks, and Miss Osaline Coley, all of Pineview, Georgia, survived. Mrs. Margaret Ann Hall Trotman, age 65, of 1257 Blue Lane Road, Pineview, Georgia. Miss Talika Diane Ford, age 47, of 105 North Bass Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, July 26, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Talika Diane Ford, age 47, was held Saturday, August 6, at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. Her pastor, Dr. Frankie Harmon, pastor of the new St. Stephen's non-denominational church, officiated. The burial followed at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her beloved husband, Mr. Terrence Harris of Cordele, Georgia, her loving son, Mr. Marquise Waits of Cordele, Georgia, her beloved father, Mr. Ernest Gamble of Cordele, Georgia, her godchildren, Mr. DeCarlos Colbert of Macon, Georgia, Miss Sakara Armstrong, Miss Kadam Hentley, Miss Carlissa Hentley, Mr. Mufford Reed, Miss Arma Marie Fisher, and Miss Janice Palmer, all of Cordele, Georgia. Her beloved and devoted sister, Miss Deneen S. Ford of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Wayne D. Ford, and his wife, Mrs. Ella Ford of Ohio. Her devoted aunts and uncles, Mrs. Lena Bell Ford of St. Petersburg, Florida, Mrs. LaWanda Bennett of Atlanta, Georgia, Miss Latrell Gamble of Ohio, Mr. Michael Ford and his wife, Mrs. Maddie Ford of Tapper Springs, Florida, Mr. Jimmy Ford and his wife, Mrs. Juanita Ford of Virginia, and Mr. Edward Ford of Holiday, Florida. Her beloved nieces and nephews, a host of cousins, to include her special cousin, Mr. Brandon and Miss Geneva Humphrey of Clearwater, Florida, and Miss Jessica Taylor of Port Richey, Florida. Her best friends, Miss Kalisa Linder and Miss Nicole Oliver Gray of Cordele, Georgia. A host of other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Talika Diane Ford, age 47, 105 North Bass Street, Cordele, Georgia. Mother May Lois Turner Green, age 82, Benz, 744 Benz Street, Vienna, Georgia, died Monday, August 1st at the Chris Regional Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mother May Lois Turner Green, age 82, was held Saturday, August 6th at the Dooley County Middle School Gymnasium in Pinehurst, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Alvin Turner, pastor of the Mount Olive Baptist Church in Byronville, Georgia, officiated. The burial followed at the Mount Olive Church Cemetery in Byronville, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Eddie Green and his wife, Mrs. Karen Green, Miss Mary Green and her husband, Mr. Tyrone Green, Miss Betty Green and her husband, Mr. Ricardo Green, Mr. Johnny Green and his wife, Mrs. Shamika Green, and Mrs. Rosa Lee Green, all of Vienna, Georgia. Her beloved daughter-in-law, Mrs. Phyllis Green of Vienna, Georgia, 21 living grandchildren, 30 great-grandchildren, her beloved sisters, Mrs. Mabel Cannon of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Juliet Hightower and her husband, Mr. B. Hightower of Orlando, Florida, Miss Berdine Turner of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Mary Turner of Doolin, Georgia, Miss Lily Mae Turner of Byronville, Georgia, Mrs. Betty Morrell and her husband, Mr. Stanley Morrell, and Mrs. Mary Palmer, both of Vienna, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Calvin Turner and his wife, Mrs. Sarah Turner of Montezuma, Georgia, and Mr. R.C. Turner of Doolin, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends to include Miss Bonnie Bullard and Mrs. Nanny Lee Burks and Miss Willeen Jones survive Mother May Lois Turner Green, age 82, of 744 Ben Street, Vienna, Georgia. Mr. Tony Lorenzo Patrick, age 64, of 3702 Washington Road, Atlanta, Georgia, died Sunday, July 31st at the Emory Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Tony Lorenzo Patrick, age 64, was held Sunday, August 7th at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted daughters, Mrs. Kamisha L. Morgan and her husband, Deacon Michael Morgan of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Nature S. Darns and her husband, Mr. Kendrick Darns of Atlanta, Georgia. His beloved grandchildren, Mr. Nadrin Patrick of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Ricky Smith Jr. of Fort Walton Beach, Florida, Mr. Jalen Smith of Hickory, North Carolina, and Miss Kaylee Darns of Atlanta, Georgia. 2 great-grandchildren, his beloved sisters, Miss Audrey A. Hollingsworth of Cordele, Georgia, Mrs. Brenda Smith and her husband, Mr. Oscar Smith Sr. of Libron, Georgia, Mrs. Loretta Patrick and her husband, Mr. Leonard Patrick of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Pamela Worley and her husband, Mr. Perry Worley of Fayetteville, North Carolina, Mrs. Rosalind Bridges Mason of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Mrs. Annie Armstrong of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Tasha Taylor of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Tamika Taylor Niger, and her husband, Mr. Jude Niger of Atlanta, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Lukman Rockman and his wife, Mrs. Priscilla Rockman of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Rahim Rockman of Hartford, Connecticut, Mr. Kurt Lofton of Tampa, Florida, Mr. Larry Green of College Park, Georgia, and Minister Kelso Darby and his wife, Mrs. Addie Darby of Atlanta, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Brenda Cooper and her husband, Mr. Perry Cooper of Miami, Florida, Miss Marilyn Hawkins and her husband, Mr. Marshall Hawkins of Jacksonville, Florida, Mrs. Rosemary Owens and her husband, Mr. Keith Owens of Houston, Texas, Mr. Henry Owens and his wife, Mrs. Carla Owens of Miami, Florida, Mr. Marvin Patrick, Mr. Anthony Patrick, both of Atlanta, Georgia, a host of devoted nieces and nephews, many cousins, to include his special cousin, Mrs. Gwendolyn Dent of Atlanta, Georgia, Mrs. Cheryl Edwards of Jacksonville, Florida, and Miss Laura Patrick of Cordele, Georgia. A host of other relatives and many sorrowing friends, to include Mr. Frank Collier of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Cleve Kellogg, and Mr. Michael Dent of Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Malcolm Kellogg and Mr. Leroy Alexander, both of Cordele, Georgia, survived. Mr. Tony Lorenzo Patrick, age 64, of 3072 Washington Road, Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Boise Dixon, age 70, 140 Sook Road, Rochelle, Georgia, died Monday, July 28th at the Chris Regional Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Boise Dixon, age 70, was held Sunday, August 7th, graveside at the Evergreen Baptist Church Cemetery in Rochelle, Georgia. The Reverend Leon Dixon officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mr. Robert Dixon, Mr. Johnny Dixon, and his wife, Mrs. Danita Dixon, and Miss Arlena Dixon, all of Rochelle, Georgia. A host of beloved grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his devoted sisters, Mrs. Marcella Mathis of Atlanta, Georgia, Miss Annette Dixon and Miss Jeanette Benjamin, Miss Mary Hargrove, and Mrs. Martha Denmark, all of Rochelle, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Willie Dixon of Eastman, Georgia, Mr. John David Dixon of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mr. Eugene Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Boise Dixon, age 70, of 140 Sook Road, Rochelle, Georgia. Mrs. Grace Mathis Johnson, age 65, of 207 Brookdale Circle, Americas, Georgia, died Monday, August 1st at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americas, Georgia. Funeral service for Mrs. Grace Mathis Johnson, age 65, was held Tuesday, August 9th in the sanctuary of the Whole Truth International Ministries in Americas, Georgia. The pastor, Reverend George F. Muntz, officiated. Burial followed at the Eastview Cemetery in Americus, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Tony Johnson of Americus, Georgia, Mr. Anthony Johnson of Auburn, Alabama, Miss Quenisha Drains of Americus, Georgia, 3 beloved grandchildren, her loving sister, Miss Bernice Mann of Americus, Georgia, her beloved brothers, Mr. Charles Mathis, Mr. Noble Mathis, Mr. Carl Mathis, Mr. Willie Mathis, Mr. Henry C. Mathis, and Mr. Isaiah Mathis, all of Americus, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Grace Mathis Johnson, age 65, of 207 Brookdale Circle, Americus, Georgia. Miss Ella Mae Mumphrey, age 70, of 1330 Forsyth Street, Macon, Georgia, died Tuesday, August 2nd, at a residence in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Ella Mae Mumphrey, age 70, was held Friday, August 12th, at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia. Reverend Dr. L.D. Cobb Sr., pastor of the Beulah Missionary Baptist Church, officiated. The burial followed at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted daughter, Miss Heather T. Mumphrey of Mount Vernon, New York, her loving granddaughter, Miss Chester Ray T. Mumphrey of Mount Vernon, New York, her beloved and devoted sister, Miss Genevieve Mumphrey, Miss Elon Hughes, and her husband, Brother James L. Hughes, Miss Florine Manning and her husband, Mr. John Arthur Manning, all of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Mary Dorberry and her husband, Sir John Dorberry, and Mrs. Lula Johnson, both of Mount Vernon, New York. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Willie Mumphrey and his wife, Mrs. Virginia Mumphrey of Cordele, Georgia, and Mr. Boise L. Mumphrey of Mount Vernon, New York. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Ella Mae Mumphrey, age 70, of 1330 Forsyth Street, Macon, Georgia. Mr. Kelsey LeJohn Colson, age 47, of Houston, Florida, died Sunday, August 7th in Florida. The funeral service for Mr. Kelsey LeJohn Colson, age 47, was held Friday, August 12th, graveside at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. His beloved cousin, the Reverend Jeff Wilson, pastor of the Odom Grove Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted parents, Mr. Benny L. Colson and Mrs. Carolyn Barner Colson, his loving companion, Miss Nikki Goodman of Houston, Florida, his beloved children, Mr. Kelsey L. Colson Jr., Mrs. Jaquisa Colson Hale and her husband, Mr. Tommy Hale, and Mrs. Shamika Colson, all of Hope, Arkansas. Chancellor Green of Cordele, Georgia, and Nicole Colson of Houston, Florida. his beloved stepchildren, Mr. Nicole Brown, Mrs. Nigel Brown, both of Houston, Florida, his beloved granddaughter, Miss Brycey Hale of Hope, Arkansas, his beloved and devoted brothers, Mr. Erskine Colson of Edison, New Jersey, Mr. Bill Colson and his wife, Mrs. Kimberly Colson of Cordele, Georgia, and Mr. Kebby Colson Sr. and his wife, Mrs. Siobhan Colson of Stockbridge, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncle, Miss Pearlie Barner of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Gracie Jones of Perry, Georgia, Mrs. Dorothy Austin of Hampton, Georgia, Miss Vassarine C. Grace of Perry, Georgia, Mrs. Martha Ruffin of Hampton, Georgia, Mr. Robert Dennis of Akron, Ohio, Mr. Eddie Dennis of Jacksonville, Florida, Mr. Willie L. Colson of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mr. David Colson of Cleveland, Ohio. A host of devoted nieces, nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends, to include his special friend, Mr. Alvin Harris Jr. and Mr. Custonia Thomas, survived Mr. Kelsey LeJohn Colson, age 47, of Houston, Florida. Again, the family of Mrs. Margaret Ann Hall Trotman of Pineview, Georgia, the family of Miss Talika Diane Ford of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mother May Lois Turner Green of Vienna, Georgia, the family of Mr. Tony Lorenzo Patrick of Atlanta, Georgia, the family of Mr. Boise Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia, the family of Mrs. Grace Mathis Johnson of Americus, Georgia, the family of Miss Ella Mae Mumphrey of Macon, Georgia, the family of Mr. Kelsey LeJohn Colson of Cordele, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during the hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. Friends, please bear with us. We're having some technical difficulties at the moment. Please bear with us. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcement. Miss Emma Jean Colson, age 65, of 112 Chuckle Court, Leesburg, Georgia, died Monday, August 8th at Wilson Hospice House in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted sons, Mr. Jason White and his wife, Mrs. Mill White, and Mr. Jamal White and his wife, Mrs. Chesler White, both of Leesburg, Georgia. 8 loving and devoted grandchildren. Her loving and devoted brother, Deacon Willie Colson Jr. and his wife, Mother Vanessa Colson of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving and devoted sister, Mrs. Brenda Frederick, and her husband, Deacon Gregory Frederick of Cordele, Georgia. Her sisters-in-law, Miss Ruby Colson of Cordele, Georgia, and Mrs. Charlie Mae Colson of Americus, Georgia. A host of devoted nieces and nephews to include Miss Tanya Colson Starks and her husband, Mr. Bubba Starks, whom she regarded as her daughter, of Cordele, Georgia. A host of beloved cousins to include Mrs. Bobby James of Huntsville, Alabama, and Mrs. Margie Hams of Atlanta, Georgia. A host of other relatives and many sorrowing friends to include a special friend, Mrs. Mary Starks and her husband, Mr. Michael Starks of Cordele, Georgia, survived Miss Emma Jean Colson, age 65, of 112 Chucker Court, Leesburg, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Emma Jean Colson, age 65, will be held Saturday, August 20th at 10 a.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Portico in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Jose Miller will officiate. The burial will follow at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, August 19th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mr. Antonio M. Talbert, age 48, of 616 West 21st Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, August 10th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted parents, Miss Phyllis Talbert and her companion, Mr. Benny Hamilton, and Mr. William James and his wife, Mrs. Ramona James. His loving and caring sisters, Miss Yolanda Talbert and her husband, Mr. Keith Talbert of Cordele, Georgia, Miss Kenyatta Talbert of Perry, Georgia, Miss Tiffany Talbert and her husband, Mr. Steve Talbert, and Miss Sierra Chanel Evans, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Tommy Jackson of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Dion James of Albany, Georgia, and Mr. Sean Harris. His loving and caring grandmother, Mrs. Jean Talbert of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Priscilla Jackson of Sylvester, Georgia, Mr. Willie Talbert of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Larry James of Sylvester, Georgia, Miss Janice James of Atlanta, Georgia, and Mr. James Calvin of Jacksonville, Florida. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive Mr. Antonio M. Talbert, age 48, of 616 West 21st Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Antonio M. Talbert, age 48, will be held Saturday, August 20th at 1 p.m. at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia, with the minister selected officiating. The burial will follow at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, August 19th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mr. Leroy Bass III, age 34, of 911 South 11th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, August 5th. Survivors include his loving and devoted mother and stepfather, Mrs. Avis Williams and Mr. David Williams of Cordele, Georgia. His loving and caring children, Khalees Bass of St. Paul, Minnesota, and Solus Barner of Cordele, Georgia. His devoted sisters, Miss Latoya Bass and her companion, Mr. LaCour Banks of Opelika, Alabama, Mrs. Sabrika Rowland of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Martavius Bass and Mr. Devin Williams, both of Atlanta, Georgia. His beloved and caring grandparents, Mr. Leroy Bass Sr. and Mrs. Joanne Bass, both of Cordele, Georgia. A host of devoted aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Leroy Bass III, age 34, of 911 South 11th Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Leroy Bass III, age 34, will be held Saturday, August 20th at 4 p.m. in the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the campus of M.D. White's Medical Institute in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, will officiate. The burial will follow at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, August 19th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mrs. Heather Ann King, age 46, of 1216 Blue Lane, East Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, August 10th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Octavius King of Cordele, Georgia, her loving and caring children, Miss Leanne Sweeney, Mr. Ethan Paul Sweeney, Mr. Kelvin Michael Sweeney, and Mr. William Sweeney Jr., all of Akron, Ohio. Her beloved adopted mother, Miss Jean Golphin of Akron, Ohio. Her beloved mother-in-law, Mrs. Debbie King of Georgia, and Damian King of Jacksonville, Florida. Her sister-in-law, Miss Tiffany Daniels of Savannah, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Heather Ann King, age 46, of 1216 Blue Lane East, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Heather Ann King, age 46, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. The Reverend J. Willie Daniels Jr., age 71, of 424 Pinecrest Drive, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, August 12th at his residence in Vienna, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, the Reverend Joyce Ann Daniels of Vienna, Georgia, his loving and caring sibling, Mr. James Davis, and his wife, Mrs. Joyce Davis of Florida, Mr. Burt Kinchins of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Russell Daniels and his wife, Mrs. Ozzie Mae Daniels of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Whitine Jackson and her husband, Mr. Charlie Jackson of Vienna, Georgia, Miss Lawanda Faye Williams of Vienna, Georgia, Mrs. Margaret Redding and her husband, Mr. Melvin Redding of Cordele, Georgia, Mr. Alvin Daniels, Mr. Thad Daniels and his wife, Mrs. Norma Daniels of Cordele, Georgia, Ms. Ruthie Daniels of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Antonio Daniels of Cordele, Georgia, and Ms. Donna Faye Thompson of South Carolina. His beloved mother-in-law, Mrs. Dorothy S. King of Cordele, Georgia. A host of beloved nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. The Reverend J. Willie Daniels Jr., age 71, of 424 Pinecrest Drive, Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for the Reverend J. Willie Daniels Jr., age 71, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week.
Invites everyone to worship with them. You may join them on Facebook Live beginning at 9 o'clock a.m. Conference call. You may join them also at 9 a.m. You also may join them for worship on Tuesday midday prayer conference at 12 o'clock noon, Thursday prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 o'clock p.m. The call-in number for the conference call is 229-329-7611. Deacon Arthur L. Park is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Dr. K.M. Williams is the pastor. The St. King Missionary Baptist Church invites everyone to worship with them during their worship service for an hour power worship service at 9 o'clock a.m. for Sunday school and at 10:15 a.m. for worship service. Reverend Woody Burnham is the pastor. You're invited to worship with the Gethsemane Baptist Church today. Everyone has a cordial invitation for worship service that begins at 10:30 a.m. Deacon Johnny Wilson is the chairman of deacons. Reverend Cecil Strother is the pastor. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship with the Davis Chapel CNB Church today. Worship service each second and fourth Sunday beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. Face mask is required. Stuart Ruby Barrett is the chairman of stewards. Reverend Arnell Wilburn is the pastor. Everyone has a cordial invitation to worship with the New Oak Grove Baptist Church today. Sunday school begins at 9:15 a.m. Morning worship at 10 o'clock a.m. Face covering is required. Deacon Alonzo Jones is the chairman of deacons. Reverend W.W. Wilson is the pastor. The Jerusalem Baptist Church of Ellaville annual revival will climax today, Sunday, August 14th, beginning at 11 o'clock a.m. The pastor, Dr. Deanne Holsey, will be in charge of the service. Everyone has a cordial invitation to attend. The Holly Grove Baptist Church annual homecoming will climax today, Sunday, August 14th at 11 o'clock a.m. Lunch will be served. The revival will begin on Monday, August 15th through Wednesday, August 17th at 7:30 p.m. Deacon Robert Woodson Jr. is the chairman of deacons. Reverend W.G. Grover is the pastor. Christ Chapel Unadilla food distribution will be Friday, August 19th from 11 a.m. in the parking lot of the PNC Bank in Unadilla. The food pantry will be on Saturday, August 27th from 10 a.m. until 12 o'clock noon at 400 Jeanette Street, Unadilla. The New Poplar Spring Baptist Church invites everyone to join them each Sunday at 9:45 a.m. for in-person and via conference call worship service. The call-in number is 253-993-3761. You may join them at Wednesday at 6:30 a.m. for morning prayer and at 7 p.m. for an hour of encouragement on conference call. Pastor Teacher Johnny B. Dean is the pastor. The Friendship Baptist Church of Findlay invites everyone to their annual homecoming service, which will be held today, beginning at 11 o'clock a.m. Revival will be Monday, August 15th and Tuesday, August 16th at 7 o'clock p.m. The pastor, Reverend Joseph Atkins, will be in charge of the service. Sister Inez Johnson is the secretary. Reverend Joseph Atkins is the pastor. That will conclude our community announcements for this morning.
West 21st Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, went at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Antonio M. Tarbert, age 48, will be held Saturday, August 20th at 1 p.m. at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia. His cousin, with the minister selected officiating. The burial will follow at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, August 19th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mr. Leroy Bass III, age 34, of 911 South 11th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, August 5th. The funeral service for Mr. Leroy Bass III will be held Saturday, August 20th at 4 p.m. at the A.S. Clark Auditorium on the M.D. White's Medical Institute campus in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, will officiate. The burial will follow at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The public walk-up visitation will be Friday, August 19th from 1 until 5 p.m. at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. Mrs. Heather Ann King, age 46, of 1216 Blue Lane East, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, August 10th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Heather Ann King, age 46, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The Reverend J. Willie Daniels Jr., age 71, of 424 Pinecrest Drive, Vienna, Georgia, died Friday, August 12th at his residence in Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for the Reverend J. Willie Daniels Jr., age 71, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our program this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mrs. Margaret Ann Hall Trotman of Pineview, Georgia. The family of Miss Talika Diane Ford of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mother May Lois Turner Green of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Mr. Tony Lorenzo Patrick of Atlanta, Georgia. The family of Mr. Boise Dixon of Rochelle, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Grace Mathis Johnson of Americus, Georgia. The family of Miss Ella Mae Mumphrey of Macon, Georgia. The family of Mr. Kelsey LeJohn Colson of Cordele, Georgia. This election is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Miss Emma Jean Colson of Leesburg, Georgia. The family of Mr. Antonio M. Talbot of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Leroy Bass III of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Heather Ann King of Cordele, Georgia. The family of the Reverend J. Willie Daniels Jr. of Vienna, Georgia. Our program is dedicated to all of the sick and shut in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals, nursing homes, and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, to my son, Jai Wilkerson Parker. This selection goes out to my mother-in-law, Miss Billy Ann Hall, and family. Goes out to my sister, Mrs. Patsy Jackson and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. My brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, and his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter of Vienna, Georgia, and their grandson, Noble. This selection goes out to my niece, Mrs. Vera Mathis, and Mrs. Rosalind Johnson of Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith, program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, and to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams, pastor of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church and moderator of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association, to his wife, Sister Kathy Williams, and the entire Williams family of Cordele and Albany, Georgia. And also we invite you to the annual Senior Citizens Annual Day at the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, starting at 9 a.m. this morning, when all senior citizens will be observed and acknowledged during the morning worship service. Again, our program goes out to each and everyone who listens to our program, and we do apologize for our special dedication. We was unable to get around to those dedications due to the large number of announcements, but do remember that our program goes out to each and everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning, and especially to you. Our final selection for this morning.
Yes, I'm going to walk. Oh, that will keep my way. Oh, child.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you've enjoyed our program. Tune in again on next Sunday morning. Remember, in your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.
Some of these days, well,